Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the Dissenter. I'm your host, Ricardo Lopes, and today I'm joined by Dr. Peter Jonason. He is Associate Professor of Psychology at the University of Padova in Italy. By training, he is a social personality psychologist who uses evolutionary theory to derive predictions and account for observable phenomena in personality, individual differences, mating strategies, and sexuality, and those are basically the topics that we're going to touch a little bit on today. So, Dr. Jonason, thank you a lot for taking the time to come on the show. It's a pleasure to everyone.
Oh, it's my pleasure too. I don't have to come on the show. I just sit in my kitchen and Skype. It's the situation we find ourselves in.
Yeah. Well, anyway, on my channel, it's always like that. So I guess I've been coronavirus friendly since the very beginning of the show.
That's why I imagine there's no budget to go travel the world and meet these people.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the connection between certain personality traits and mating behavior. So you're interested in personality. In your work you talk about the Dark Triad, even the Dark Tetrad. That is something that I haven't yet touched on the show with any guest that I had on. So what are some of the most important, or at least the personality traits that you focus the most on and that you relate to mating behavior in your work?
Well, most of my research in personality is focused on the Dark Triad and a little bit on the Dark Tetrad. But the question of how does personality relate to mating behavior is incredibly vast, because mating behavior is essentially the fundamental challenge of all biological life. And so people have studied it in relation to the Big Five. So extroversion is related to particular kinds of mating behavior. Conscientiousness is related to other kinds of mating behavior. For instance, David Schmidt showed that around the world, conscientious people were more likely to be sexually cautious. So they took more efforts to use protection, to talk about STDs, and to be slower to engage in sex as well. Whereas other traits like I've studied, like psychopathy, for example, they seem to engage in the very opposite approach to their mating life. So one of the diagnostic features, as long as psychopathy has been a thing, really, is about promiscuity being linked to psychopathy. There isn't much evidence to suggest that these people are interested in long-term relationships, committed relationships, for reasons we can get into, of course. But there's a kind of a biased system in people's brains. Everyone has different biases, and those biases we describe as personality traits. So when you average all these biases out, they generate some behaviors, and those behaviors we describe when they have a pattern as something like psychopathy or extroversion or openness or emotional intelligence, right? So it's the output of these things that we can't measure, these biases, that we call personality. These then are the proximal predictors of whatever you want, really. Mating behavior, aggression, all these types of things. So mating behavior is a very specific manifestation of these biased systems in people's brains about how they evaluate situations, their hormonal makeup, all this type of stuff. And through what we call, as lay people and as researchers, personality traits like, again, psychopathy, narcissism. And so the person who's high on, say, psychopathy tends to see mating opportunities everywhere he or she goes. So in neutral situations relative to other people, they see mating opportunities. And this tendency to see mating opportunities will then predict, and of course does, not just more mating success, like number of sex partners and offspring, but also more effort put in to find mates, less effort put in to keep mates, more effort to put in to steal mates from others. So the ramifications of personality, in a general sense, are tremendous for mating behavior, whether it's casual sex or romantic relationships. I haven't touched much on the romantic part, mostly because what I end up studying by default becomes mostly about casual sex. But people who are more neurotic and less agreeable have shorter marriages. So David Buss showed many, many years ago, for example, that these are traits that predict divorce rates. I think it was 3 years into the marriage. And so it suggests that personality not just has implications for who we choose, which is mostly what I study, but also for the longevity of a relationship, the health of a relationship, and maybe even the degree to which children are successfully reared. There's an issue of compatibility with personality that we don't tend to focus on a lot in evolutionary psychology, but I think it's probably more fundamental than we appreciate, because cues to compatibility should say, this is a relationship that could work, this is a relationship where we could cooperate in rearing an offspring, and I think, especially given the importance for the first few years of a relationship, you want high level of compatibility off the blocks, so to speak. You want to have it immediately because of the really precocious place that human babies find themselves in when they're born, and for the first 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. So another topic that you also explore a little bit in your work has to do with life history theory and life history strategies, right? Is there any connection or some sort of relationship between these personality traits, like for example the ones from the Dark Triad, and how people develop their particular life history strategies, like a slower paced one or a faster paced one, or things like that?
Yeah, sure. So in my view, that's life history theory is probably the most useful, let's call it mid-level theory, to allow us to understand both within people differences, within species differences, so across individuals, personality as we call it in humans, but also between species, so comparing elephants to mice or something like that. So my contention has been that the Dark Triad traits are reflective of or engage in a fast life history strategy. And what this means is that they tend to allocate most of their effort, their metabolic energy, their time, and all this type of stuff towards mating effort. And this is a catch-all term that life history strategists use. It doesn't exactly mean mating effort. It means things like you'd expect from a narcissist, like pursuit of new mating opportunities, dressing in a way to get people's attention, an obsession with status, for example. And so given the evolutionary advantage of the status, in particular for men, of course, men who are engaging in our life strategy, a fast life history strategy, should be ones who are trying to maximize quantity over quality in their mating effort. And the way they do that is they are engaging in what we call quintessentially narcissistic behavior and even psychopathic behavior, where they misread cues to sexual interest, for example. They maybe push too hard when it comes to the opposite sex. They engage in casual sex. They have, as I've shown in a number of years ago with a colleague and an honor student, they have exploitative attitudes about sex. So we looked at rape-enabling attitudes. So we didn't ask whether they had raped or not, but we asked about things like rape myth acceptance, for example. And so the obvious interpretation of this that most people have in the world is, see, this proves that people high on psychopathy are horrible people. And I think that that's missing the theoretical point, in that it allows you to say, hey, this is the pattern you would expect from life history theory. We don't have to condemn it we don't have to condone it. I'm sorry. We don't have to condone it to study it. We could simply try to understand in a dispassionate way what and why these people are the way they are. The obvious and the mistaken thing that people do is they put people they don't like into another category of other. And so thinking about psychopathy as a pathology, it allows us to vilify those individuals It distances ourselves and is making us feel safe, I think, from these people, and it ignores the possibility that there might be a little bit of darkness in each one of us, and that's just not reasonable. Like, there are contexts under which being dark is adaptive, and this is not a new thing. I'm just uniquely saying it about something like psychopathy and narcissism, Machiavellianism, that can be particularly contentious to people. But back in the 80s, Daly and Wilson were arguing for what they called the young male syndrome, that young men were aggressive, for example, and while it caused all kinds of chaos in their life, it also provided them with other things they needed, like mating opportunities, like status, like access to resources. So we, as a society, tend to think very poorly about these traits, very negatively about people with these traits. But I don't think it's unreasonable to think, your professor might be a little bit high on narcissism. He gets up there, she gets up there and talks all day long about this and about that, and thinks that they're smarter than other people. Indeed, we have a study that's coming out soon that looked at self-assessed intelligence. And as you can imagine, professors probably think they're smart. Found, no surprise, that narcissism, in particular the admiration aspect of narcissism, was associated with inflated judgments of people's intelligence, but it wasn't related to actual intelligence. So we measured IQ and inflated intelligence, right? Self-reported intelligence. And narcissism, for example, in this case, is not related to IQ, but it is related to having a sense that I'm smart. And we followed that study up. This is with one of my colleagues here I'm actually in Warsaw right now on sabbaticals, but Warsaw, Poland, of course. I'm going to say his last name wrong, Marcin Zerinjakowska or something like that. Sorry, Marcin. And in the second study, we showed that, and this is replicating some of his other work, but that these same people, the reason that they inflate their intelligence is because they believe that being intelligent will result in some sort of social capital, right? It will make them popular, for example, and this suggests that there is this kind of adaptive utility for thinking highly of yourself when it might not be accurate. I think Robert Trivers even wrote a book about the adaptive utility of self-deception. Yeah. So even if these narcissists genuinely believe that they're this smart, right, that they're not just bragging, but they secretly know, which is the Freudian interpretation, that the narcissist secretly knows that he or she is worthless. If you put that aside, which I'm dubious about most Freudian hypotheses, it suggests that maybe the delusion is useful, right? The delusion gets them up in the morning and to go do things. It gets them to do, podcasts with some strange man from Portugal or something.
Right, but I understand those kinds of benefits that people can obtain if they are high in at least certain of the traits from the Dark Triad, but there are certainly also some psychological, social, and physical health costs associated with them as well, right?
Oh, tremendous. That's actually almost the definition of a fast life history strategy. It's that you're willing to take one on the chin, so to speak, for the cost because you're fixated on the immediate rewards. So psychopathy, for example, and the Dark Triad in general, but if you ask them, do they want $100 now or do they want $1,000 in a year, they, on odds, choose the $100. Now, I'm oversimplifying. For my colleague Dan Jones, for example, he would greatly disagree with this point in that he would argue that Machiavellianism uniquely it appears to be a long-term strategy, right? In that they have this, it's called the long game in con, right? So for con men, they call it the long game. And there seems to be something about this, that they play the long con, right? They have this tactical, long-term vision. And, the best example in my view would be, say, for instance, Darth Sidious from Star Wars, right? So the Emperor plays the long game and no spoiler alerts or anything like that, right? But that's what this emperor does. And there's other characters that do this as well. There's a character in Star Trek. Obviously, I like science fiction. Star Trek is of course a nod to my friend David Schmidt, if he even watches this. The Kai Wynn in DS9, Deep Space Nine, Machiavellian, long-term thinker, moving the chess pieces, this kind of thing. Now, I reconcile that with that these words like fast are metaphors. Really, they're not. It's not actually about fast or slow in terms of speed. Although in some cases it is, like with reproduction, it is often that. But psychologically, it doesn't require. There isn't a requirement that the person has a immediate approach. I think what's more accurate to say is these people are willing to engage in selfish behavior that often causes them costs and imposes costs on others. That'd be my shorthand. And the Machiavellian is someone who's willing to do that. Just like the narcissist, just like the sadist, just like the psychopath. They take, again, one on the chin so that they can get the rewards that they want. Regardless of the fact that it offends other people, it hurts people's feelings, it might even physically hurt other people. It doesn't matter that they're more likely to suffer from depression, to have lower life expectancy. All these things don't factor into their equation. I don't think they're unaware of these things. I think that the weighting system, the biases in their brain, the weighting systems in their brain simply devalue those other things. And the utility here about life history theory comes into play is that if these people were like this all the time, then we call this a pathology, right? That it's not always adaptive to always be a short-term thinker, so to speak.
Sure.
But if you can show that certain contexts generate particular responses, and so, for instance, we showed that in Turkey, relative to Australia, the Dark Triad traits are higher. So what the hell does that mean? Well, I think anyone knows the economic, social, political situation in Turkey is far more tumultuous than it is in Australia, which is one of the safest places in the world. It's at least wrote this paper. Australia was rated the #1 safest country in the world for women, for example. So it's a safe place. And so, no surprise, the Dark Triad traits should be lower because there's no adaptive utility for being this kind of selfish person all the time. Mm-hmm. Turkey, in contrast, we found that it was much higher. And, of course, we looked deeper and we said, okay, well, what is one of the mechanisms that might account for this? It's not just let's just compare two countries and make up some story. We found a mediation effect, which suggests that the mechanism is about competitiveness. So Turkey is viewed by Turkish people as very competitive, and that competitiveness seems to drive increases in the Dark Triad. Narcissism in particular is the key one here. And indeed, narcissists tend to be extremely competitive individuals, like to be #1 in situations. They want to be the center of attention. I mean, I could even argue that my dog, who's sleeping right now, is a narcissist because whenever we meet anyone else, he just wants to be the same. He's like, oh, love me, love me, love. He doesn't say that, right? But he acts in that way that's like, hey, you see me? You meet me? Hey. And so my dog is basically a narcissist, always seeking out to be the center of attention.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, Pedro.
Okay, so let me just ask you about one specific aspect that you studied about mating behavior associated with the Dark Triad traits that has to do with willingness to be caught in an extra pair relationship. So could you tell us about that? I mean, are there people out there that really want to get caught in an extra pair relationship?
Well, I don't know if there's people who want to get caught. I think wanting to get caught and willingness to get caught are slightly different things. It's that there are costs associated with getting caught, right? So James Bond, this is a Daniel Craig James Bond when he's in a limousine, I think, with Vespa Lind, and she says something like, "Am I going to have a problem with you?" And he says, "No, you're not my type." And she says, "What? Successful?" And he says, "No, single." As in his type is, right, to sleep with married women. And if anyone's watched even 3 James Bond movies, they know that that is a quintessential pattern of James Bond. That's even one of the features that I think feminists are most bothered by about James Bond, is that he's this Lothario sleeping with married women. He's such a scoundrel, this type of thing. So I don't think he wants to get caught. I think although sometimes he's a provocateur for sure, and so maybe he does. But I think for most people, no. I think what people behind the Dark Triad. I use James Bond as a metaphor here, of course. I think what people behind the Dark Triad are really more concerned with is the immediate success and the immediate excitement associated with a sexual encounter. But there's an element of competitiveness for stealing someone, for mate poaching. As in, I convinced your girlfriend to sleep with the girlfriend that your wife, your girlfriend, all that kind of stuff. And it's even a theme that you see in rap music, where the rapper is bragging about how his your girlfriend wants me more than you, and when you're not, this kind of thing. It's not an uncommon thing in pop music, in rap music. This kind of mate poaching bravado of it's like there's like an added rush to it, I think, because not only have you convinced a woman to sleep with you, you've also made that guy look like a chump. Right? You've also essentially cuckolded him. And so there's a cuckold bonus going on here. So not only are you potentially having sex, which these people are very motivated by the hedonistic value system, but there's also this chest beating thing going on where the men get to be like, ha, I'm better than you. Your girlfriend was willing to cheat on you, me. Right? Because the assumption is she's not willing to cheat on her boyfriend with everyone. Because if she was, she wouldn't have a boyfriend. Right? So I'm somehow a champion. And so this reflects back to some of my older work, which before I got into the Dark Triad, which was about sexual conquest. So men who feel a sense of pride by having sex with many people tend to at least report that they have more sex partners. And so most research on the sex difference in number of sex partners has focused on women's tendency to underreport, for social desirability, for social stigma issues, this kind of thing. And I just simply said, this is 2005 or something, 2007. I said, okay, I'm totally fine with that. But isn't there a possibility that men inflate their reports, independently as well? So women are saying they have fewer, men are saying they have more, and then there's this gulf between, right? Because in theory, for every man that has sex, there's a woman who has sex. And so in theory, the number of sex partners should reach parity. It won't be exact, but it will be closer than what we find, and that's even in college students. So even in college students who have had much, much less sexual experience than, a 40-year-old man or something, a 40-year-old single man, I should say. For a married man, it would be very different. There's still that discrepancy. So women tend to still report, a small handful, and men are reporting more like a large handful, like a dozen type of situation in college. And this is in college students. Typically freshmen, sophomore, college students. As I'm sure you know, most research on these questions use college students. This was before MTurk, of course. But a lot of that has to do with sex research, not to be too cynical about it. Sex and relationship research is really difficult to get funding for, because unless you're trying to get enable people to have more healthy marriages, longer marriages, all these kinds of things, granting bodies don't think studying, for instance, something I've studied, booty calls, is grant worthy. It seems trivial, right? Who cares about that, for example? So as a result, a lot of the research we have on things like sexuality is from convenience samples, or now more and more MTurk samples, where we can pay people an almost an embarrassingly small amount of money to take our studies for us. I joke, when I was in Australia, I used to joke with my students about, we'll set the country to America, and we'll post it, 7 o'clock tonight, and by the time we wake up, 500 people will have taken this. So it's just too convenient And all the evidence seems to point to this is a good sample. Like it allows you to draw the theoretically reasonable conclusions, the outcomes associated with that sample are similar to outcomes in other samples. I remember I had a colleague once who didn't believe me, and he collected with an honor student, and he had the honor student collect data in a student sample and an MTurk sample, and then he secretly compared the results in both samples to see if it moderated it. And the student told me this behind closed doors, so to speak, that this other academic didn't trust me. And then he learned that no, PK was right. Like, this is a trustworthy sample. So there is this old school mentality in some people that MTurk samples aren't trustworthy. But my whole career is capitalized on MTurk samples, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and since you mentioned college students, let me ask you about another specific thing, that is, so we know basically the main differences in terms of mate preferences for men and women, but when it comes to educated people, are there some important or interesting interesting preferences that they have in terms of mates?
Sure.
Comparing to other people.
Yeah, I think what they have is similar to what everyone else has, is that we like to mate with people like us. We like, especially when it comes to settling down, right? We need compatibility, right? And so I would struggle, for example, as a professor to be with someone who is, for instance, a hairdresser. It's not that it's impossible. It's that the probabilities are against me and against her, and you would expect then people to pair up with others like them. And it's not because you overtly seek it out. It's that you find that those are the people you're simply more compatible with. Those are the people that you run into more. There's an effect of propinquity. I'm more likely well, in the olden days, if it was 50 years ago, I would be more likely to marry another academic or a student. Right, because those are the people who I'm going to encounter on a daily basis, and those are the people who are likely to be interested in the same things that I'm interested in, live a similar lifestyle, values, all that kind of stuff. Right? Of course, now today, because of things like Me Too and et cetera, the possibility, broaching the topic of even dating a former student is enough to get you castrated by the mob. So that leaves this. Well, where do you encounter people? Okay, maybe you encounter them at conferences. Conferences are more and more becoming safe spaces where adults can't be adults. They've sterilized conferences to a large degree now for the rightly so. Some bad things that have, of course, happened. So there is maybe more now than ever a cost to be paid if you are single and still educated. But ultimately, it's about finding someone like you. Women, for instance, tend to want a smart guy all the time. And that doesn't mean they want a genius or they want a professor, much to my sadness. They want a guy who they view as smart, right? So if they view a guy as smart, that's kind of all that matters. And as soon as she views you as dumb, it's over, right? Because when she views you as dumb, she simply doesn't respect you anymore. And at that moment, when a woman doesn't respect the man, it's over. She's no longer turned on by you. She no longer wants to listen to what you have to say. It's the end of the relationship. Men tend to also want a long-term partner who is educated or intelligent, but they care about the intelligence of their casual sex partners less than women do. And so what that means is, in the short-term context, men simply lower their threshold. They don't make a big deal about whether she's as smart as he would like, because we're just going to have sex, right? And for the woman, though, evolutionarily, of course, she's obligated no matter what to that offspring. So it makes perfect sense from parental investment theory, strategic, sexual strategies theory, that women maintain this heightened interest in well, not heightened, it's not fair. This stable interest in an educated partner. Now, one of the interesting things is it only really matters unless, intelligence that is, or education, only really matters if the minimum threshold for attractiveness hasn't been reached. Attractiveness acts as a gateway trait, a threshold trait, and if you don't have it, you're not. It doesn't matter if you're smart. It doesn't matter if you're nice. It doesn't matter if you're fashionable. All those things don't matter anymore if the minimum threshold for attractiveness isn't reached. And when people hear this, they misunderstand it. They hear the word attractive and they read into it in a really bizarre way, and it's always baffled me. Because of course I've had these conversations with women I've been courting. I can't believe I said courting. It's not that when I say I want someone who's attractive, I want Mila Kunis or Scarlett Johansson or Adriana Lima or something. It's I want someone who I find to be attractive. That's it. It's not supermodels, right? And the same thing for women. Women aren't saying they want Channing Tatum from Magic Mike or something like that. You know, when you look at that person, if you don't want to kiss them, nothing else matters then. You see someone from afar and you just don't approach them. And if the guy does approach you as a woman, you're kind of like, go away, creepy man. Now you view him as creepy, and you view him as all these other things. Indeed, research on sexual harassment shows this overwhelmingly to be the case, that if a woman finds a man attractive, his advances aren't seen as harassment because she wants the attention. You know? This plays out at work, and it's playing out at nightclubs and on Tinder and all these kinds of, modern situations. So without attractiveness, it doesn't really matter. So once you've reached minimum level of attractiveness, great. Now, this causes all kinds of political and social upheaval. And the reason is because the easy interpretation, and maybe even a lazy interpretation, is and the one that gets the Skinner, rats in people's brains to hit the Skinner box, is to say, oh, that's just because men are jerks. Men don't like smart women. Men are intimidated by smart women. This is a very feminist and thereby often misandrist, right, man-hating view. It says that men are somehow horrible because they don't want you, essentially. And this is just ridiculousness. And what we've found, at least a little bit, is that the rejection of smart partners tends to be localized to women who view themselves as particularly valuable. Right? It's not, men don't seem to really put too much emphasis on that. For men, intelligence, for example, is icing on the cake. Right? If you are sufficiently attractive and you're smart, oh, great, I won the lottery. But for a woman, she places such an emphasis on things like intelligence, because what intelligence ultimately gets at is the thing that women care about much more than men do, which is status. So intelligence is a vector to attain status, resources, all these kinds of things. So all the cues that we know from David Buss's work, for example, about ambition, social status, social level, all these types of things are, and intelligence as well, are all tied up in this resource acquisition ability that women need more than men because of their obligation to offspring. There's a book by, I think, Jonathan Quirk called It's Not You, It's Biology. And it essentially says that women are looking for men who can grow babies outside of them, and men are looking for women who can grow babies inside of them. So my ability to grow a baby outside of me is predicated on my access to resources. And intelligence is one of those things that says this person has access. Now, IQ is probably not really the key here. It's resourcefulness. It's, if I can use a reference from the 80s, it's MacGyver kind of situation, right? It's your ability to solve problems. It's your ability to acquire resources, to work in hunting groups and all this type of stuff. And so intelligence, because it runs up with this kind of social status issue that women really care about, women who are high in value tend to be the ones who suffer from the loss of mating opportunities, because as you become more successful as a woman, there are fewer and fewer men who are more successful than you, and you get this bottleneck effect. You're running out of options. And so this has been shown by, for instance, a guy named Townsend, whose first name I can't remember for some reason, many years ago, a completely unappreciated, undercited study where they showed that in female and male lawyers and doctors, it's the women who experience the mate shortage, but it's men experience like a deluge, a flood of opportunities. So these men have the quintessential cues that say, "Oh, he's a doctor," for example, right? Like that kind of thinking in women, where it's like he has access to resources, woohoo. And indeed, other research, even more entertaining research, where they take the picture of a guy and they just change his income, or they just change his watch, for example, and my face with a Rolex versus a what's this? Something cheap. I don't know, a Casio, or I make $100,000 a year, or I make $20,000 a year. Women rate the face as more attractive. Like their judgments of men's attractiveness are contaminated by this status cue, because the status cue is ultimately what they care about more, and so their brain conspires against them to convince them that ugly guys are actually attractive because they have lots of status. Because by being convinced that the guy is attractive, it enables them to mate, it enables them to have sex, it enables them to cooperate, to rear offspring, all these things. And so their women's brains are literally conspiring against their own to promote. I mean, this is selfish gene theory if I ever heard it. Right? Working against their interests. Now, what this often runs into is that there's this weirdness about men's and women's when it comes to attractiveness. So men tend to make judgments of attractiveness that are divorced from other features, and women not. And this causes conflict between the sexes, because there's this like, oh, well, but this, but that, for example. But when a man says that someone is attractive, it's just that. It should be all these other bad things, right? The question was simply, is she attractive? But you flip it around to a woman, you say, is that guy attractive? And then there's all this, well, it depends. No, it doesn't depend on anything. Look at their face, look at their body, right? But that's not, women's brains aren't working that way, because their mechanisms for evaluating attractiveness require more information, whereas men's don't, right? So given men's ability to have short-term mates, right, for example, one of the mechanisms behind that is we don't need a lot of information, right? Any listeners that are on Tinder, for example, and any viewers, right? When a woman meets a guy from Tinder, for example, she's collecting data, right? She's trying to work out, is he worth sleeping with? He already wants to. He's already ready. Like, he wouldn't have asked you if he wasn't ready. Mm-hmm. And this is like what I call this is what people call like the 3-date rule, right? And so as men and women get to know each other, there's this process of creating a sense of safety, I think, a lot in women's minds over those 3 days. But the guy is just waiting his time. He's just, yep. I mean, if you're on the 2nd and 3rd date, he wants to sleep with you. There's just no question, right? And if you don't think he wants to sleep with you within 5 minutes of meeting you, you're foolish. Of course he does. So let's accept this reality, and we can all say, okay, I know as a guy that I'm already ready, but I know as a woman, okay, maybe you need a few more minutes, a few more hours, a few more dates. And maybe we'd have less conflict between the sexes if we had a better understanding of these evolutionary forces, of evolution in general. But we live in societies, you there in Portugal, here in Poland, which is very Catholic, Italy, I don't even have to mention, right? And of course, America, right? Where evolution is a bad word in some, right? And then the people's understanding of evolution and evolutionary theory and its implications for humans is completely impoverished, if not biased, by nonsense critics like, I don't know, Cordelia Fine, for example, or religious critics who are keep ticking the same. Well, what about transitional fossils, or this kind of like that Darwin heard and then have been fully destroyed? But we just nope. Let's just keep talking about the same things, and if you keep saying it enough, it'll be true.
Yeah, right. So You've already mentioned this earlier in the conversation, but let me ask you about a phenomenon that you studied, the booty call. So what does it tell us about men and women's mating strategies and some of the compromises they are willing to do?
Well, so let's for the viewer, let's maybe define what it is first.
Yeah, sure.
Might not know. So a booty call is an act, right? The booty call itself is the act of calling someone up, texting them, for instance, reasonably late at night, typically. So usually past 10 o'clock is what we showed, but I'm sure it can be 10 in the morning as well. But usually later at night, so maybe you've been drinking or something like that. And it is with the implicit, typically only implicit, understanding of sex. So you might make a booty call like, hey, you want to come over and Netflix and chill, for example. So one of my colleagues, Avita March, she wrote a paper entitled Netflix and Chill, and it was about booty calls and this kind of thing. So we use code words, and so this is, as Pinker puts it, it's a veiled sexual request, right? And so if you said, hey, do you want to come over and have sex? The answer is probably no, especially if a man is saying it to a woman. Now, if a woman says that, a lot of men are like, they're already in the car, right? Vroom, like Speedy Gonzalez from the cartoon, right? And, poof, they're gone. Or the Roadrunner or something. So that tends to be what the act is. That's the booty call, right? So, but the relationship that it surrounds, because it's not a single. I can't just call up a stranger for a booty call, right? So I can't just dial some random number and have a booty call. Instead, it's someone that I have some passing acquaintance with, who I have established some degree of it's a sexual arrangement, essentially. So it's a fairly casual sex relationship, but it has some elements that make it slightly more appealing to women than simply one-night stands. Mm-hmm. So the sexual aspects, of course, are very appealing to men. I'm not saying women don't like sex, but the fleeting nature of one-night stands makes very unappealing to women. So Elaine Hatfield showed many years ago in one of her most infamous studies that when women are asked, will you have sex with me, they almost all say no, right? Whereas men often say yes, and those men who say no, their excuses are very interesting. I have a girlfriend, but can I have your number? I'm in a rush, but can I have your number? Right? It's all, they say no, but they don't really mean no, right? Because a free lunch is really hard to turn down, right? So the element that makes it more appealing to women is that there's again, to come back to this word, there's an element of safety involved because there's an established relationship already. And I don't mean like boyfriend, girlfriend, I simply mean you know the person. And there's less social stigma attached to kind of habitual sex with the same person because you don't seem like a slut, because it's a repeated, you're going back to the same, source, whatever the word is, repeatedly. So this makes it appealing for women. Now, but what it reveals is that women are really engaging in casual sex only reluctantly, because what we find is that when you ask why the relationship doesn't keep going, why did it end, men say because she wanted more, and women say because he didn't want more. And so what it suggests is that women might be trying to leverage, and I'm not unique by saying this at all, but women might be trying to leverage casual sex into a relationship. And Justin Garcia has shown that a lot of these casual sex relationships transition into serious relationships. That you start out by having sex, you find out there's some kind of compatibility, you have this stew of hormones that are conspiring against you, and you just kind of fall into a relationship. So it's a kind of what you might call ass-backward mating strategy, right? So instead of dating and then having sex, you have sex and then you date. And there's no moral judgment. However you find love, It's fine, right? But what it does reveal is that when these things don't transition into a relationship, and when they do, they probably do transition because the woman is pushing the issue. And I'm not even ashamed to admit I've been in this situation where I've been in these kinds of relationships, and it was the woman pushing for more. Sometimes it transitioned to a relationship, sometimes it didn't. But the men seem to be using it as a way to have casual sex and probably get a little bit more, some emotional support, which we'll get to in a second. But women seem to be using it to shoehorn their way into a relationship. And when that doesn't happen, it's usually because the woman says no. Now, booty calls are also unique in the sense that they are characterized by extremely low levels of emotional content. One-night stands, surprisingly, have quite a bit of emotional content. And the reason is I think, you have to go in a one-night stand from zero acquaintance to sufficient acquaintance that you can have sex. So things like hand-holding, kissing, all that kind of stuff, hugging, comes into play. Mm-hmm. Indeed, it's even probably, which we didn't look at, but I'm willing to bet it's more common for a one-night stand partner to sleep over than for a booty call partner to sleep over. And what booty call partners seem to do is, because of the longevity times the fact that they want to keep this a sexual relationship, they have to minimize emotional content, because if they don't, they'll do what pop singers call catch feelings, right? They will develop feelings because they'll start engaging in couple-like behavior. They'll sleep over, then they'll eat. Oh, well, then they'll have sex again, and then they'll just, all of a sudden, the weekend is gone, and they've spent it together. So booty call relationships tend to be characterized by low levels of kissing, hugging, hand-holding. They minimize contact outside of the sexual relationship. They don't, if they see each other at a bar, for example, they're going to avoid one another, right? Essentially, I'm looking for someone else now. Don't cramp my style. I'm not committed to you, so you can't spend time together outside of that sexual arrangement. And so what people have done in these relationships, they have negotiated a very narrow band relationship that involves repeated sexual encounters with someone that you know, but that you kind of don't really want to date. And so we showed it, I think I showed, was it me? I think it was just me, in terms of the authors of the paper, that booty call relationships tend to be placeholder relationships. Like, until something better comes along, we'll have sex. Whereas a variant of this, called friends with benefits, seems to be often about testing the waters, right? Trial run, seeing if this could work. And so maybe that's what a lot of these relationships that Justin Garcia is referring to are, these trial runs, these successes of, well, we gave it a shot. Sex was part of the shot. It allows me to get to know you. Are we sexually compatible? Do you like the same sexual kinks that I like, for example? And then, okay, well, yeah, let's give it a shot. Friends with benefits. These are the people who might sleep over, for example, where you're testing it out. But there's space between one-night stands and committed relationships that has relatively been ignored only until maybe 2009 or something. At least, especially from an evolutionary perspective. But in general, so non-committed sex, for even now, tends to be pathologized, and one-night stands, booty calls, friends with benefits are basically uncommitted sexual relationships, and they have been pathologized either explicitly or implicitly since people started studying them, unfortunately. So there's a kind of a taboo around them. So.
Yeah. Okay, so let me just ask you about one last topic before we finish. Earlier you mentioned some things that probably stand in the way of people having a better understanding of how evolutionary psychology works and how our minds evolved, and even other aspects of evolution like religiosity in the US, for example. But you wrote a paper where you talk about certain specific aspects that you think also stand in the way of people's understanding of evolutionary psychology, like human exceptionalism, environmental determinism, genetic determinism. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I think this was a commentary that Laura Dane and I wrote that I think you're referring to, but I think there's more to this than simply that commentary. David Schmidt and I wrote a paper about predictors of the common criticisms of evolutionary psychology. Some of the criticism really come down to, let's just call it politics, and politics and personality. And so individuals who are left-leaning, progressive, that is, often have agendas that appear to be incompatible with evolutionary thinking. Here's a person who's an example. So this book, Sex at Dawn by Christopher Ryan, is an example of this left-leaning politics and a kind of an ideologically driven way of viewing human evolutionary history in terms of mating, in terms of relationships. And so he clearly has a what I call free sex agenda. It's a very hippie agenda about sex. Let's all love each other. Let's all have sex, polyamory, this kind of thing. And it does an injustice to the to biology and what we know, the way in which he's sold this. And but it gets lots of popular appeal. Same thing with the Cordelia Fine book. I think it's Tyrannosaurus Sex or something like that. And it's ideologically motivated. A recent commentary by David Buss and Bill von Hippel kind of go into far more detail than I can go into here, but there is like this unwillingness to learn about evolutionary theory, to think deeply about it, about not just for humans, but for the animal kingdom, how human beings fit within a larger animal kingdom space. This is, of course, human exceptionalism. But also this, if we think that these things are evolved, then they must be fixed. I once heard a woman, a professor, I think, at a conference say that because people develop their emotional intelligence skills, it's therefore not an adaptation. And I was like, well, making babies, I can't make babies when I'm 5, but I developed that ability, and it is no question an adaptation to make babies. Like, are you saying that if something isn't come with you when you're born, it can't be an adaptation? Like, it can't. She was like, no, it's a simpler hypothesis to say that it's a learned behavior. And I'm like, whoa, no, wait, that's not the simple hypothesis at all. Like, that is the more complicated hypothesis, because you're creating an unparsimonious model to develop these learning mechanisms. How people learn. Maybe it's just a natural trajectory. And then what about all the other animals who learn emotional intelligence, right? So are you saying that they also, that evolution is not responsible for the way they are? We're somehow special? So social psychologists in particular have this inability, this implicit assumption that human beings are special. And what I call it actually is the tyranny of the frontal lobes. They believe that the frontal lobes are the most important part of who we are. That yes, I mean, they reflect things like our personality and all these great things, but most of who we are is beyond our conscious control, beyond our conscious awareness. Our sexual attraction is deep inside our brain. Just because we have an experience of it in our frontal lobes doesn't mean the rest of our brain isn't conspiring against us and contaminating the way in which our frontal lobes are evaluating the situation to enable us to have sex. And it's like they believe that mate choice, for example, is a fully rational process. Indeed, I think if you think deeply about feminist scholars' approaches, social constructivist approaches to mating, it is this hyper-rational approach that there isn't this, the assumption is, oh, well, I chose it, right? And so what you hear then is kind of criticism like this. If you're saying that the reason that men and women engage in different rates of casual sex is because women are more likely to pay the biological penalty for doing so. Mm-hmm. Now that we have condoms and birth control, doesn't that negate all those systems? It's like they don't understand that all these systems are biologically wired systems that don't care about what you're thinking. They think that the local conditions are all that matter. Now today we have condoms. And anyone who says this has like not thought for 3 extra seconds and said, okay, we know that women have access to birth control now. Are they just as promiscuous as men are? Mm-hmm. No. Indeed, even if they are, men are even more promiscuous then, right? So if women raise their promiscuity by 3 points, men are also raising it by 3 or 4 points. Now they have access to more women who are willing to sleep with them. So like, I'm going to have sex now, okay?
Yeah.
So it's like it's part of the problem here is that there is a cult kind of thinking going on where there are certain things that you can or can't say. There are certain ideas that you're supposed to believe that men and women are the same. But they deserve the same equal rights, but that's not the same thing as being the same. So we have one of my colleagues many years ago, he was dating a feminist, and she said, men and women are the same. And this guy wasn't even an evolutionary psychologist. He said, really? Drop your pants. Right? He wasn't trying to be sexual. He was trying to say, we have different reproductive biology, and this has fundamental implications for our psychology. But one of those limitations that we talked about is mind-body dualism. The assumption that our brains and our bodies are separate. And so, yeah, we can have different biology. This is something like maybe Alice Egley and Wendy Wood might agree with, that our bodies have been subject to evolutionary forces. But our brains? Like, why not our brains? Our brain is just another organ. Like, so again, back to the principle of parsimony, they make up another hypothesis, right, for this Cartesian error, Cartesian dualistic error that we can't get out of psychology. This sense that there are two separate things going on here. No, it's just one thing. It's monism is the only workable solution. So being a reductionist, which is what this is quite an antithetical to the social psychologist mindset. They believe the world is complicated, right? They're always going to say it depends, it depends, it depends. For example, they don't like the idea that you could say, well, on average, men are more interested in casual sex than women. They're going to say, what about my friend Susie? Of course, I always say, well, give me Susie's number, right? That's my joke about casual sex. But maybe you're wrong about Susie. And even if Susie is really interested in casual sex, the men she meets are more interested in casual sex, right? And so there's this problem of statistical reasoning, right? So I've had meetings with deans where I'm getting in trouble for some of the things that I've said about, say, sex differences, and it's like they don't understand issues of distributions of scores in bell curves and how we make statistical comparisons based on the amount of overlap of those distributions. It's like they don't, and this is a dean of at a college, of a university school with a PhD in I think geography, for example, and it's like their statistical reasoning is off, and it might be great in every other way, but when it comes to topics about evolutionary psychology, when it comes to sex differences, when it comes to mating, this just runs against people's left-leaning biases about quality and all this kind of. The assumption is if we think men and women have different brains, then we think that they deserve equal rights. And what's really annoying about this is that when scientists on the let's call it the dispassionate side of the equation, they show differences in brains, they show differences in behavior over and over and over again. We keep having these conversations because there is no amount of evidence that will convince these people because it's religion, right? So this is where I bump heads with David Schmidt, and we disagree on how to deal with this situation. So David Schmidt's a much nicer guy than I am, like 1,000 times nicer than I am, and he's very conciliatory, and it's always like he thinks that if you just keep giving them more studies, you'll somehow convince them. And I'm like, no, you won't. You'll never convince these people because not only are they intractable with their mistaken assumptions, and it's often assumptions, they're often not even aware why they think what they think. Or ignorance, they don't simply understand the model. I had a conversation once with a pretty strong feminist professor from University of Connecticut, Amanda Dennis, and we sat and we had breakfast, and I explained to her the logic, for instance, sex differences in mating. She was like, that doesn't bother me at all. Like, no one's explained it to me like that because the old professors with their mistakes infect their students, and it just like a religion. So it's a mind virus that just keeps going forward, and people like David Schmidt think that this virus can be cured by essentially giving them more medicine, right? Giving them more studies, and I just don't agree. I think they will not be convinced. and you're going to get gray hair trying, right? Don't even bother because of these implicit assumptions. One of those that we haven't touched on is the should fallacy, the is and ought fallacy, where people think, well, that's the world shouldn't be that way, but it is that way. This is where you get to things like research, the very provocative research on rape, for example. Like, it exists. We're not condoning it, but let's be dispassionate about it. Another one of these assumptions that people struggle with is the free will assumption. There's an assumption that people are defining their life as they go. You can choose to be happy. This guy, like, no, if my brain is wired in a particular way of being happy, rewiring my brain is the stuff of science fiction. So we have the illusion of free will because we do choose things, but choice is not free will. So free will is the lack of free will is more about the choices that we make are themselves constrained by biology, by chemistry, by physics, by opportunities, by the environment, none of which we have chosen. And if we haven't chosen those things, then we have no will, because all those things influence why we choose what we choose. And mating is a great example, right? If I know you have a girlfriend or a fiance, you and her, and she as well, will probably say that you feel compelled to be with someone. Now, this word, I find that Australians, for instance, struggle with the word compelled. Like it's a legal order, like the law says you're compelled. No, you're physically compelled. Your biology says be near this person, right? So this is why when a woman says, when a woman is reluctant to like be around a guy, it's a bit like, well, she's not really interested then, because feelings compel you to do things, and that's one of these revelations of your lack of free will. And so I think, I can just go on forever about the limitations. I mean, there's the religious ones, but for people who are interested in this idea, what I would point people to is a book by Daniel Dennett called From Bacteria to Bach.
Yeah, it's his most recent one, right?
Yeah, yes, and it deals with a lot of these unspoken assumptions and misunderstandings that people make about evolution, whether the idea of how do you get, complexity from simpleness, or having the apparent design without having a designer, and so he just takes it back to first principle and says, okay, it's that you don't understand the actual heart of evolutionary theory, and if you don't understand that, you're not going to be very good at evolutionary psychology. There's lots of evolutionary psychologists who do evolutionary psychology kind of because they like evolutionary psychology as much more than they understand the mechanics of evolution, and then therefore then the way in which they generate hypotheses are constrained by their understanding. And so, for a lot of people, it's sexy. Oh yeah, let's do a study in evolutionary psychology. It's sex differences, and so therefore, if it's sex differences, it must be evolutionary psychology. No, like it's not. Like perfectionism, for example, is just a random thing I picked out of my head. It may or may not be evolutionarily relevant. Mm-hmm. And so there's a kind of, not a sloppiness, but like a laziness with evolutionary psychology, and this to our detriment as a field, and how people view us, because it seems like well, anything goes. That's not fair. Like good evolutionary psychologists, David Buss, for example, have very strict parameters. Very clear, like if you're going to say something is an adaptation, it actually has to produce an adaptive outcome. It has to help you survive. It has to help you make babies. It has to increase what they call your RF, your reproductive fitness. So I don't want to go on and on. But yeah, there's many misunderstandings that nice that if we could, as I think what was it. What was this? Not Rodney King. Who is this guy's name? Is that can't we all just get along? Like we would get along much better if we could iron out these misunderstandings, and then all of psychology could be unified, like all of biology is, by the only theory that accounts for life. Mm-hmm. Right? And there's every reason to believe if we find aliens on Mars, evolution. It doesn't mean to look like us, right? Star Trek is far-fetched, right? It doesn't look like us. But evolutionary processes will still play out. Mm-hmm. but we can't, and so we're fractionalized, and so psychology is broken off into random disciplines, and then the impression from lay people is that it's nonsense, right? It's that it's not scientific, because we have no organizing system. There's disagreements in physics about quantum physics and Newtonian physics and string theory and all this. Fine, but they're like narrow band arguments within parameters that are set. But psychology can study anything you want. Like, I want to study how people feel about plants. Like, I mean, it's interesting, but why? Like, why should we care? Why should we print this paper? And I think that's what evolutionary theory offers: is guidelines, is parameters, is a way of saying, what are the important questions and what are the methods that allow you to make the conclusions you want to make.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so Dr. Jonason, let's end on that note. But just before we go, would you like to make reference to some places on the internet, for example, where people can have access to your work?
Yes, well, I mean, obviously, besides this wonderful conversation, I have a website that's easily found if you Google me. Like, apparently women I date actually Google me. So peterjonason.com is my website. And yeah, that's really the one. I think I'll add that I'm looking now for PhD students to join me at University of Padova, and probably also looking for PhD students to join me here in Warsaw. And so there's potential to apply to 2 different universities to work with me, depending on where you want to be. Both places are great, but it's up to you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I will be leaving links to your website and probably to other places on the internet where your papers are located at in the description box of these interviews, so that people can go and check them out. It's very interesting. And Dr. Jonason, again, thank you a lot for taking the time to come on the show, and it was really fun to talk to you.
My pleasure. Have a good day.
Hello everybody, thank you for watching this interview until the end. I've been doing quite a lot of interviews with top academics and intellectuals from a variety of fields since February 2018, but the channel is still not sustainable, so if you can, please head to my Patreon page and consider making a pledge there, any amount you feel comfortable with. And if you prefer places like PayPal, you can also go there. All of the links are in the description box of the interview. So if you can, please help me. Really, I would really love to keep doing this project in the long run. Otherwise, and if you like what I'm doing, please share it, leave a like, and hit the subscription button. I would also like to give a huge thank you to my main patrons and supporters: Karen Litske, Anne Blanchett, Pererga Larsen, Lau Guerrero, Francis Ford, Hans Fredrik Sunda, Ricardo Vladimiro, Craig Healy, Adam Kessel, Olaf Alex, Jonathan Wiesel, David Diaz, Anian Kata, Jacob Klinkby, Matthew Whittingbird, Arno Wolf, Tim Hollacy, Enric Alenius, John Connors, Paulina Barron, Philip Force Connolly, Jerry Mueller, Herbert Gintis, Rutger Voss, Bo Weingard, Rebecca Newberger Goldstein, Dan Demetriou, Robert Windegar, Rui Inácio, Arthur Coe, Marco Neves, Max Bailby, Colin Holbrook, Susan Pinker, Thomas Trumbull, Bernardo Seixas, Pablo Santurbano, Simon Columbus, Jorge Espinha, Phil Kavanagh, Corey Clark, Mark Blythe, Roberto Inguanzo, Mikkel Stormir, Eric Newman, Samuel Andreev, Tiago Nunes, Bernard Hughney, Alexander Dunbauer, Omari Hickson, Fergal Cusson, Evan Bodrenko, Hal Herzog, Nuno Machado, Don Ross, João Alves da Silva, Jonathan Librant, Oslam Bulut, Nathan Nguyen, Staten T, my producers, Isar Webber, Rosie, Jim Frank, Lucas Stafiniak, Ian Gilligan, Sergio Codriano, Luís Caetano, Matthew Lavender, Tom Vanegdam, Curtis Dixon, João Linhares, Benedict Mueller, and Vega Guidi, and my executive producer, Michel Rugieski. Thank you for all.